So, Wish is out. Man, if I was Disney, I'd be feeling pretty annoyed that my centenary film has done so badly. But yeah, Wish is out, and I went to see it. And for those that may not know, Wish is simply the latest in Disney Animated Studios' film releases. The one that was hotly anticipated as it marks and celebrates the 100th anniversary of the founding of the company by the Disney brothers. Using a blend of the classical 2D animation and a more modern computer style, and infusing lots of classic Disney tropes and references, it was a celebration of all things Disney, hotly anticipated by some people, with some pretty good trailers. From my layman's perspective, it was going to be a smash hit, and then it came out and it was not a smash hit. It was perhaps the furthest thing from a smash. I mean, simply from a box office perspective, it was a flop, it was a bomb. My god, it bombed hard. I mean, maybe it's going to have a late stage comeback like Elemental did, but I wouldn't hold my breath about that. Not like that happens with every single flop, that's why they're flops. And so, with a budget of potentially up to $200 million, excluding advertising costs, it really did need to make a lot of money from the get-go, and it hasn't. So far, it's on $105 million after like 3 weeks, which is very bad. And on top of that, it has slowed down significantly weekend after weekend after weekend. So it's flopped, and it doesn't have much staying power. On top of that, the critical consensus is that it sucks. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has an aggregate critical score of 48% approval, which, to put that in perspective, is the lowest score since Chicken Little released 18 years ago. That's how much critics hate it. It's being lauded as one of Disney's worst ever films. So bad that one of Disney's other worst ever films is held up as its peer. I mean, hell, it even has a lower critical score than Home on the Range, which hardly seems fair. But on the flip side, audiences seem to rather like the movie for what it was. And out of over 500 reviews, it has an aggregate Rotten Tomatoes score, as of writing this, of 82%. So already, we're seeing that disparity in professional reviews and in the regular person who saw the movie. And the older I get, and the more animated films I've watched, I can't help but feel like critics are getting more and more pretentious and out of touch with how they perceive animated cinema and films. They're expecting everything to be high art animation like the works of Miyazaki. But that's not fair. Every genre and every movie is different, and for me it's strange that people seem to find there's a one-size-fits-all approach to these sort of movies that makes them good or bad, even when audiences are clearly eating it up if they bought a ticket. And I gotta say, having gone to see this film, filled with dread because I've heard it sucks, I actually enjoyed myself. I thought it was a lot of fun. Is it the perfect movie? No, not really. But it's very fun and certainly not bad like the critics would have you believe. It's fine. And as for why it's seemingly making next to no money compared to what it should, I suspect it was probably bad marketing. That's all I could point to. It really should have succeeded, but it hasn't. Oh well. But yeah, I do think there's a lot to like about the movie. The story itself, it's fun. It follows the character of Asha, who in an attempt to have her grandfather's wish granted, discovers that the King Magnifico, a great sorcerer who extracts wishes from everybody in the kingdom and removes memory of them from their mind to free them of the burden, is unlikely to ever grant the majority of the wishes that he receives, all to ensure the kingdom remains safe and stable, unlike his childhood home. And so, Asha decides, screw that and screw him, and goes off on her own to try to reclaim the wishes, along the way accidentally summoning a wishing star down to Earth, which in turn goes ahead and grants wishes to anybody and everybody that it desires. This pisses off the king, he goes absolutely crazy, does bad things, uses dark magic, her friends help her out, they fight, and through the power of hope and singing, they defeat the villain. Like I said, the story's fun, it's not groundbreaking, it is at times cheesy and dorky, it's not their best work, but it was fun. I was never bored, I never felt like I was wasting my time, and I never felt like they were insulting my intelligence with this thing. They knew what it was. They were not trying too hard to turn this movie into something that it wasn't or shouldn't be. They kept it simple, and whilst at times it was maybe a little too simple, like they didn't always delve into some of the areas that they should have, it still worked. The characters themselves, though, I think they were the weakest part of the story overall. They were probably my low light of the movie. They weren't bad, though. Nothing like that. They weren't annoying, they weren't cringy, they were fine, but just simplistic, a little bit too simplistic, window dressing of sorts. It feels like they were there because they needed to be there, but they never were fleshed out enough for my tastes. And that includes the likes of Asha and Magnifico. What's his backstory? What happened to his family? Why didn't they explore that at all? It just felt a bit basic and like they should have gone into some areas a bit more deeply. It was surface level characterization that honestly, it does feel like a bit of a throwback to those early Disney films where their characters are basically cardboard cutouts. Although I will admit, this was still better than those. Moving on, and before we go, I'll acknowledge that I am likely in the extreme minority for this point of view, and that the actual animated quality was high. The watercolor type thing, the blending of the animation techniques, to me I didn't like it and I didn't get it. I didn't get into it. I liked the idea in theory, but in execution it didn't feel or look right to me. I wonder if maybe that might have put off people who saw the trailer as well. After all, I feel like visuals are a big early draw for an animated movie. You have to wait and see for most of the stuff. The songs, the story, the characterization. But with the visuals, you can tell right away from the trailer. So did that maybe scare some people off? That it was trying to straddle that line of 2D, 3D and didn't quite do it? Did that make them not want to see the movie? Honestly, I wouldn't know, but it didn't really enhance my enjoyment all that much. It felt kind of unfinished to me. Okay, so that was a bit of good with the bad. But like I said, overall, I thought the film was good. And there are things that I think were solely good with really no negatives. And primarily, I think that's the soundtrack and the songs. They were really good, exciting, maybe not as catchy as I would have liked, but that's not a negative. Not everything can be an Encanto level soundtrack in terms of being super catchy to the level of playing them on repeat over and over and over every chance you get. Wish doesn't quite hit that level for me, but it was still really good. The songs were not bad, they were engaging, they were exciting, they did not make me lose interest. The only time I ever rolled my eyes at a song was not even to do with the song itself, but more the context of it all. It's when they all start singing and their hope pretty much defeats big bad evil King Magnifico, because that's totally narratively satisfying. The superpowered villain who can't be defeated because he's too strong is beaten by hopes and dreams expressed through song. Lame. That's probably my only major negative with the soundtrack. Everything else was just great. I just hate that it became a weird plot device that felt cheap and unearned at the end. But otherwise, good songs, very nice, once again. And on top of that, I was really feeling the throwback references to past Disney films. I've seen some talk about how they should have done more of this, as in they should have tied the references more heavily into the plot. And I'm like, but why? Why would they do that? It makes it less fun and would really look like they're trying too hard to skate off nostalgia. Already, just off the top of my head, her friends are the seven dwarves, just simply made into different humans. She is the fairy godmother. Magnifico is the magic mirror. We have the wishing star as a key character. Bambi turns up at one point. Like, what more do you need? Do you need it to be some weird meta film where all of the past films come together and acknowledge each other? Because they've already done that in Ralph Breaks the Internet. And then they did it again in Once Upon a Studio. It was good, but you don't need to see it again. This way I think was much better. And then on the other side of things, I've seen reviews talking about how these references that they did include exposed the lack of imagination in this movie compared to the back catalogue. Yes, compared to the golden era films that were famously light on story, heavy on spectacle. It's like, what are you doing? Don't tear a muscle with that stretch. This is literally there as a fun throwback. Are there more of them than usual? Yes, but it was the 100th anniversary film. Of course they're going to include them. But come on. How do you see these characters in the film that resemble the seven dwarfs in look and personality and think, oh, actually, this takes me out of the story and makes me think about Snow White, which obviously had a far superior narrative. Cringe. And so, yeah, I just think this film is altogether getting too much hate. Like, is it the best film that Disney's ever made? No, of course not, but the story is still decent, and the characters, whilst bland, are not off-putting. The music's great, and whilst I personally did not like the animation, just from what I've seen, literally everybody else seems to, so I think that's a me problem. For me, the film's just suffering that typical curse that plagues modern-day animation, that if it's more childish and simple, idiot reviewers seem to think it lacks value or is bad, that if it isn't a revolutionary tale filled with twists and turns, it's not up to scratch. And I just disagree. And I think the disparity between audience scores and critical scores is proving my point. For me, it's a solid 6 or 7 out of 10. And I think a lot of other people think that way as well. But to critics, somehow, it is the worst Disney film that they've put out in decades. Which to me is absurd. And I also don't think it helps that there's been a lot of box office flops in the last couple of months. The box office is at a really weak point in terms of ticket sales, and that Disney's rep is at rock bottom after Bob Iger's shithead comments during the strikes. I do think on some level, even if subconsciously, that kind of stuff also plays into people's perceptions on the movie, and it impacts how it's perceived and how good it is, at least in my opinion. But yeah, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Wish, if you've seen it? Did you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.